Okay, moving on to the next one. At this angle, I didn't get quite as much of the palette, but the first one I think gave you really a lot of information on the way I'm mixing. I'm starting with those big dark values for the shadow shapes. So this initial lay-in always looks darker than it is because we're comparing it to white. And that's not only the video. In real life, it always looks darker. You get used to painting it the right value the more you do it, but it's also a reason to tone a canvas. I don't often tone my canvases because I like the translucency of the transparent colors, but it's one reason to get your canvas covered as soon as possible so you can get that white paint off and start comparing color. But as I studied the scene, I noticed that the difference between the shadow of the rocks and the value of the water is fairly close. And so I want to be painting those, trying to group those shapes as close as possible. I can always pull one lighter and go back and forth, but as I'm trying to find it closer to the 2 value range, I'll start finding those groupings. And once again, 2 values for a painting is difficult, and it's not the end all. I just always mention it because that's how I'm trying to design, because it always becomes more than 2 values. But if I can start thinking that way, it reduces me from putting 20 values. So a lot of times in the comparison, trying to get the comparison of a dark value in the light area compared to a dark or light area in the shadow area. And I know it's really difficult to see this because I'm painting in the shade and it's kind of pulling it all the same value. But you can see all those areas I just painted across the top of the canvas, those are all in sunlight. And so they will be lighter than even something in shadow that's light. So as you can see, I've tried to group even the light area. The ground covering, which is called ice plant, is a red color. Red's a dark value. So I want to make sure that I don't paint that too light. So I'm keeping the canvas white to remind myself that that's going to be a much lighter value than everything around. If I start painting that and it starts to get too close in value with either the shadow or the ice plant, then I'm not going to have any separation of light and dark. So here I'm starting to put in my lights and trying to find that slight temperature variation that I can see in the cliffs as the material of the cliffs and the weathering of the cliffs, that I want to make sure I reflect that in my temperatures within the rock. Now it's a small painting, I'm not putting every detail, it's kind of a law of averages. You're putting in the average temperature, the average value, and I can't say enough, this is really how you build anything for the future. That working on a big 30 by 40 painting of this, it's just not going to work until you can put these relationships down with confidence. And I've given this assignment to people. My recommendation, if you do want to get better at painting outside, paint 100 of these before you paint anything large. Don't start going out and painting a large painting or doing an inside studio painting. Go outside and paint hundreds. Set a goal this time next year that you'll paint 100 of these. When you're painting this size and you're taking whatever size canvas this is, like a 12-16 or something, and you're taping it off into 4, you could do 4 of these in a morning. Get out there early and do 4 before lunch. So getting to 100 at this size is not as tall of an order as you might think. Doing larger paintings, 100 of them is going to take time. So 100 small ones, get your relationships down, understand getting your value right and your temperature right and your shape making, and all of a sudden you're going to go into a larger painting and not struggle with it at all. You can see, once again, even my lights, all these values look quite dark because I'm painting in the shade. And there's a reason for that. Some of my demos for this class I will paint in sunlight so you can see my canvas, but it's to the detriment of the painting. It will look good on film, where these look dark in film, or they look dark when you're outside, but when you come inside and they're not lit by the sun, which is the most powerful light we have on Earth, you can't never reach that type of lighting in your gallery, in your studio, in your house. So painting with the sun off your canvas or your canvas in shade, right? This is just turned away from the sun. I will be able to judge relationships much better, and my painting tends to be more light and full of life. Sometimes I have to paint with full sunlight just because the situation of where I'm painting calls for that, but I do recommend painting in shade. So that's, like I said, why I've included what the finish looks like. Even though the finish has not been changed, it's the exact same painting. I never touched it. It was photographed on location right when I was done, but it was photographed with light on the canvas. Can you notice also as I'm working the front rock cliffs with the back rock cliffs how the front has more saturation, the back is more tempered and less saturated. So it sits in the distance more as one shape. So you get to know who my diva is, who the star is, instead of looking at every cliff trying to understand, where am I supposed to look, or what was this painting about? So I'm coming in with that same, I'm not going any smaller brush, it's my same flat, and I'm using that to carve in the shadow shapes on those distant cliffs. And the neat thing about a long flat is the colorgraphic strokes you can get. It can paint very thin, and then with a turn of your wrist, it can paint very thick. So that's how you really get those interesting colorgraphic strokes. All right, so I'm just coming to a conclusion with this one. Being out there doing these, I'm learning when I go back and do these small. I do these, but I don't even do them enough. If I took my own advice and didn't paint anything but this size painting and did 100 in the next year, I would improve. My schedule doesn't allow me to do as much as I used to, but this is where the real improvement happened, and it never ends. If you do 100, no matter what level you're at what point you are, you do 100 small ones, you're going to be really pleased with the outcome. Okay, so now let's just take a look at both these canvases, and you can see, what I was working, that separation in where the subject is, where is the distance, what's it about, how am I grouping these values, and how am I recreating the sense of light and the sense of depth. So as I bring it back into my studio to peel off the tape and reveal it with its nice crisp edges, you may notice there's 3 paintings. I did paint one more after doing the 2 demos filming, but you'll be able to see all 3 and how I studied those relationships. You may notice on this one where I have kept more saturated color where I want you to look and let the distance be a little less saturated. The other is by holding the value and just doing almost the puzzle pieces of color next to color, how you can build a painting with not worrying as much about brushstroke, but just more placement of color. And as we move into this one, as this was the first one in the morning, the more earlier morning light, that take a note how within that light, how we can just move color note by color note throughout that light side, and it helps show planes. So through simultaneous contrast and by mixing the right temperature, we can get the right color. And on this one, this was fun to try to keep the light side of the rock very close in value. But you can see the cools of the top of the rock through parts of water or reflection of the sky versus the side planes of that rock, while still holding it very close in value. So color is a lifelong battle. It is something I am still studying and learning about every day. But the more we go out and study from nature, we will just improve far more than we can believe. Color lives in the middle. And what I mean by color lives in the middle is that if we think of a value range from 1 to 10, 1 being the lightest and 10 being the closest to black, so white to black, what I do is color lives in the middle of there, so I don't go all the way to 10 in my paintings, I don't go to 1. So I never paint fully black or fully white. So this is one of my paintings, and I want to have you take a look that the areas you might perceive as white, and if I hold it up and compare it, take a look at how much darker that is than white. And if we go all the way to white, we lose temperature and we lose that it lives all in the same universe or the same atmosphere. We can do the same with black. This is iPhone, and take a look at these areas in here, and you can see nothing goes all the way to black. Once again, if I take white, let's move it around in the clouds, I'll move it around the painting, and you can see nothing is going quite to white. So this can be a very interesting way to study color through value. The next time you're at a museum, take a white card with you and something black and hold it up to the paintings, not too close so you don't set off the alarms, but hold them up and check the value, and I think you'll notice that the color does live in the middle.